All right, Internet, it's 1:45 in the PM on Monday, the 5th of June, and I'm staring at what the SEC did to the cryptocurrency markets this morning. They decided to put a little urine in their coffee and make people lose a few $1,000,000. But that's because Binance does Binance things, and the SEC doesn't really appreciate that. So if you want to read up on that article, I'm not going to dig too much into it. However, it is rare that I get to call out a single headline in terms of sentiment response to the market. Price action, period, blah, 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 blah. That's right. Check this out, though. Bam, there it is. So you can tell when the news hit, or when it was about to, because people front run that shit on rumors all day. So about 15 minutes prior, we had a big sell down, and then the news hits, and bam, you get a big old dump. So this will unfold on places like Twitter and all over the Cointelegraph and probably CNN, right? Because it involves U.S. regulatory bodies of the Securities and Exchange Commission, just basically a organization that doesn't like competition, for being able to, we'll just call it, to enable not banks to meddle with markets. They hate that. Like, that's their job. But right now we're at 25,732. So even with that, it really isn't like a huge deal. Like, we didn't wake up this morning to a $22,000 BTC. We'll go to a $25,000 BTC. So it being what it is, here we are. We're overextended, right? And on Friday, I was kind of looking for an overextension. Not Friday, Thursday. Thursday, I was looking for an overextension. And that didn't happen. And I didn't have like an insight into the SEC's dealings. I wasn't expecting like a black swan style headline to show up and just destroy the market. I just saw that the market was complacent. There wasn't a whole lot to talk about or anything really going on. It was just kind of going through the flows of generalized response to normal online content. So the resonance that we had was very basic and very easy to trend. It wasn't overtly bullish. As you can see, it was operating underneath our white line here, which is the mean for the micro trend that was established on the 31st of May. 27,606 is where that mean's at. And we spent the weekend pretty much just kind of hovering, right? 3 sig, lower side 3 sig, lower side 2 sig. So all the way down to 26,609 and then 2780, got above 27,000. And then it carried its way up to that lower side 1 sig at 27,371, little wick above it. And then it kind of deflated over the morning. So worked its way back down to about that 3 sig range. And then it just so happens that the news struck, pushing it right underneath that 3 sig. And that way this overextension period, right? And the overextension period is about measuring the anticipated elevated levels of volatility response to sentiment data, right? So if something egregious were to come out, basically those levels are our Elon Musk levels, to be quite honest. So when a egocentric narcissist blabbers his mouth on Twitter, for example, right, the market will respond in kind, because somebody with a big stage and a loud mouth will impact the market in a much larger way than without a whole lot of staying power anyways, than the generalized macro market and consumer base. So our overextensions here were outside of that range. Now, if we dial it back here a little bit to the 30th, this period here is an exceptional level of volatility, with 26,468 on the low side and 29,444 on the high side. It was pretty large delta that just appeared on the 30th. It didn't stick around for very long, right? And our lower side 5 sig out here is basically where we're at right now. So I'm just kind of following this a little bit because the return to our current microtrends 5 sig is actually at the lower side 4 sig for this delta. So there's things that are compounding here between this current trend level and the previous one from the 30th of May that I'm watching. And the way to kind of really read this is going to be on the macro level. So I can compound these levels here, and I'm going to look at the macro sentiment analysis, which basically takes the last like month and change window and gives us where those support and resistance levels are to establishing price action for BTC in the market. And that'll help us determine what kind of down and what kind of up we can look for, and what those resistance and support areas are going to be as this shakes out. So right now, ETH had a wick, and ETH being ETH, it's been a little bit overreactive to the sentiment volatility. So having a brand new trend event that published here, I'm looking at this on the 15 minutes because I just have to look at the resolutions for these because this trend is very new. But ETH being ETH and overreacting to the market, of course, there was a mean that got published at 1768 here. And we have an upper side 1 sig right now at 1805, operating above that. Does have a little bit of a resiliency for this dead cap bounce that's probably going to happen in and around this range with a 1828 high side before we start to meet a level of micro resistance that is going to be a bit more difficult for it to get through because the market should not just turn around and recover on news of the SEC. It's going to be in the news cycle for at least a half day, and you're going to see more reactions to people who might have missed the story earlier, and they're going to come in and do whatever they're going to do. I mean, granted, the stuff that got pulled out of here are the people who are like glued, right? They're glued to news or they're glued to charts. And then you got all the other people who are not glued to news and glued to charts. So what they're going to do is they're going to react in kind as well. It's kind of like the dissecting of how a dead cat bounce actually occurs, right? Especially when it's sentiment driven. You get the first sell down to the people who are on it, and then a little bit of recovery because the price is cheap and you can get a bounce, right? And then there's no staying power in it. There's not like a reversal of news and online content that's going to magically turn the market immediately bullish. So how long is it going to last? I mean, this is a 24-hour news cycle, so I could say between now and midday tomorrow for me. You know, how far down does it go? I mean, I really don't see it going down too much further, right? So especially for like ADA, we're also on the overextended period. We're well outside that range. We're actually playing on the one that is, you know, on the 31st of May. We have this back here at early morning, 31st, where the lower side 4 sig overextension period was basically exactly where the price is at now. And you can see here that the downward of this on the furthest down we could see, at least for ADA, is just underneath 34.5 cents. So trim another 0.6 cents off the price of ADA for another leg down after we get some recovery, possibly up, maybe retouch that lower side 3 sig at 36.29. But again, the news has to shake out. Right now, people are like, oh no, right? So you're getting a fear response in the market. It's going to be over exaggerated. And that's the way it is. But looking here at the macro sentiment support and resistance, and these are significant levels, especially when you're talking about bigger moves in the market like the one we just had. And you have your medium support, which is where we're at currently. It's a relatively strong macro support level from a sentiment perspective for BTC, and that's at 25,573. And you can see we just went straight to it and kind of been hugging it ever since the news broke. So getting back above 26,000 is the tipping point for it to actually return to the high side support and start treating that like resistance, which is at 26,491. And until we actually break that price, getting back to 27,233 isn't even a thing. So we could technically get about halfway back up to that high support side on a recovery bounce, but without anything overtly turning the market more bullish in terms of online content and the way that's received by the consumers that are acting on that news. You're not really going to get an elevated level of recovery in the market short term, right? So because this is also compounded by the fact that like over the last week and so, the complacency in the sentiment data was just kind of like, So it kind of felt like everybody was in the gym on the treadmill at the same speed, just kind of cruising. And the market was responding to that in a pretty routine wave pattern that wasn't overtly bullish, wasn't overtly bearish. We didn't see low 25,000s. We still haven't. And we haven't seen 29K retest, right? So those, we're just in this like range, this horizontal range. And I'm not saying that this morning's move down to 25K and what is it, 25.7 is horizontal by any means, but it also wasn't an egregious Band-Aid ripping off moment for BTC to tumble all the way down to low 25s and put the $22,000 champions, you know, on the radar. It's still not there. So, you know, more on the down to earth approach for ETH. I mean, yes, it's been a bit more erratic in how it's responded to the market, especially on the high side, the bullish elements in 1925 being the highest in the last 9 days. But we also just returned to mean with this pullback. It's really not the end of the world. The mean being 1793 right now for ETH on the macro sentiment support and resistance levels. And this one's actually operating a little bit on the higher side between the mean and the upper lower resistance range, is 1834. So a return to that lower resistance does get a little bit easier to do on a recovery bounce to 1834, but it's going to treat that like resistance as well. And then there's a possibility, a pretty high possibility, that we do get another leg down from this news, and that would put the high support at 1753 square on the target. Closing at and above the low resistance to try to turn that medium resistance at 1884 back into a point of interest for ETH. That's all it really takes. It's just a tipping point on these levels. For ETH, I mean, it moves through these ranges with the level of erraticness. It's like 24 hours per level. So just kind of keep that in mind for timing as you're working through this as well. Here we are with ADA, a bit more of a healthy retrace all the way down to that medium support range, which is a strong 34.7 USDT. 34 cents, by the way, on that. And then a return to mean up at 36.8 would not really be out of the realm of possibilities as well on recovery, but I would still treat high support like resistance right now at 35.9. But also that's just not really going to be a thing until we actually get about halfway back to it. So halfway between 34.7 and 35.9 puts you at squarely about 35.1 cents. So yeah, just keep an eye on the market, really. I mean, this is a really easy narrative to build around because there's one single headline that's causing a negative impact in the market. You know, from a sentiment analysis perspective, we look at these things in a more macro, broad stroke kind of approach. But every now and then you do get a little micro deal that kind of helps build the proof, right? In that, hey, sentiment data does move these markets. And yeah, it moves it like it constantly, but today it's moving it based on a single instance of information. So we'll talk more about it tomorrow. That was a bit rambly. 12 whole minutes of your life gone. You'll never get back. If you did appreciate this, that was probably loud. Feel free to like, subscribe, and, you know, call your loved ones and tell them how awesome I am, because I'm not.